Live 2 raises the question of whether Greece actually uses its global influence. Global Greek Influence is the name of my podcast launching season 7 next Tuesday, the 1st of September 2026, here on my YouTube channel, Yota Pimenidou, and on Spotify under the name Global Greek Influence. So, the name of the podcast itself focuses on raising the voice and profiles of global Greeks to synthesize what constitutes today's and the future's global Greek influence. Global Greeks, through their work in institutions and industries across continents, raise the bar of Greece's influence. Last week, in Live 1, I raised the question of whether we are thinking big enough for Greece and the new Eastern Mediterranean. While in the coming season, you will listen to global Greeks and non Greek experts who shape narratives, policies, and decision making globally. I emphasized back then, last week, what Greece does in the Eastern Mediterranean and that we should be thousandfold in scale and rate in what we do, especially in regard to existing political formats and frameworks. The Global Greek Influence podcast is not hosting another discussion about the crisis of the week, not another attempt to predict what one leader will say tomorrow morning. We probe and shape the question of what kind of Eastern Mediterranean, for example, we actually want to exist 10 or 20 years from now, or, for instance, what Greece is doing today to help create it. So, in the context and based on what was addressed last week, you can check out the recording in the description box below. Note that there was a connection interruption, so a second live recording followed, which completes the original live video. So, based on last week's live, just keep one thing in mind. Greece must think big in port and shipping in the Eastern Mediterranean, accompanied by energy, education, and training. So let's move to whether Greece actually uses its global influence. Looking beyond Greek influence in its immediate neighborhood in the East Med and into the globe, we need to ask ourselves, beyond whether we think big, what constitutes big? And recognize that big and influence are not about dominance, but about what would serve our best goals in the short and long term, while we are literally in the middle of turbulent events that are changing the global landscape in terms of how, for more than half a century, we have understood diplomacy, trade, the economy, alliances, and how alliances work, as well as the new routes taking shape right now. So you understand that the question of whether Greece actually uses its global influence is about determining what's next in 10 or 20 years from now. If we are thinking 10 or 20 years ahead, then we need to reconsider what we mean by the relationship between Greece and Greeks around the world. For decades, we have understood this relationship primarily through identity, culture, language, history, and the emotional connection with Greece. These remain important, but there is another dimension becoming increasingly relevant. The experience global Greeks accumulate by living and working inside different societies, economies, institutions, and ways of thinking. And I deliberately mention experience rather than political influence. Someone who has spent 20 or 30 years working in the United States, Australia, Britain, Germany, Canada, or the Gulf understands another society from within, how institutions operate, what businesses prioritize, how arguments are received, and what another country considers an opportunity or a risk. All these elements become especially important because the international environment itself is changing. We often talk about alliances as fixed structures, but even long-lasting alliances are becoming more demanding in terms of what every participant brings into the relationship: security, defense, energy, infrastructure, technology, supply chains, economic resilience, and regional stability. This does not necessarily mean that alliances are becoming weaker. It means that the content of an alliance is becoming broader. For Greece, therefore, the question is not how to become louder internationally. Being louder does not necessarily mean being more influential. The question is how Greece becomes increasingly useful, credible, and relevant within its existing and developing relationships. And this is where the global Greek diaspora becomes particularly interesting. We usually understand the diaspora geographically: Greek Americans, Greek Australians, Greeks in Canada, Britain, Germany, and elsewhere. But perhaps we should increasingly understand global Greeks through fields of knowledge and experience: energy, shipping, technology, universities, investment and supply chains connect countries, and people connect all of these. A Greek engineer in Germany or a Greek professional in the Gulf is not simply part of a Greek community, but also part of an international environment through which knowledge, ideas, technology, and investment move. But I would not like to see the diaspora treated as an instrument of the Greek state. Global Greeks are citizens of different countries with their own political views, professional responsibilities, and understanding of their identity. The objective cannot be to organize everybody behind whatever Athens wants at a particular moment. The much more interesting question is whether Greece can create a mature relationship with global Greeks through which knowledge, ideas, and opportunities move in both directions. Because we very often ask what the diaspora can do for Greece. But what is Greece doing to remain relevant to the diaspora? And how seriously do we listen when somebody who understands another system tells us that perhaps we should look at something differently? If the relationship consists only of asking global Greeks to promote Greece, we lose one of their greatest value: the ability to see ourselves through different international perspectives. The Greek American experience is important, but it cannot simply be reproduced everywhere because every society is different. What works in Washington will not necessarily work in Berlin, London, India, or the Gulf. Global Greeks understand these different environments and can tell us only where opportunities exist, but also how Greece is perceived. And perception matters because countries do not develop relationships only according to what we think we are. They also respond to what they understand us to be. So, what does Greece want to represent internationally in the world now emerging? We know Greece's historical and cultural influence. We know Greece as a global shipping nation, a European country, a NATO member, and a country occupying an important geographical position. But geography itself does not constitute a strategy, and history by itself does not determine the future. Perhaps Greece has an opportunity to project something neither aggressive nor passive: a country that connects, A country firmly positioned in Europe but understanding the Eastern Mediterranean. A country whose shipping operates globally, which participates in energy and connectivity, invests in education and human capital, and can maintain relationships across regions. And these relationships become more complicated as alliances themselves change. Countries which operate on security may compete economically. Countries which cooperate on energy may disagree politically. Countries sharing an interest somewhere may have different interests elsewhere. So one of the important capabilities for Greece over the next 20 years may be to maintain cooperation while managing disagreement. And this is also why principles matter: respect for sovereignty, international law, democratic institutions, freedom, protection, and the rejection of changing borders through force are connected with Greece's own historical experience and with the international environment in which a country of Greece's size has an interest in living. But principles and interests are not opposites. Greece needs to understand its interests while remaining predictable about the principles according to which it operates. And perhaps predictability itself becomes influence in an increasingly unpredictable environment. Global Greeks can contribute here without carrying a message dictated from Greece. There is an enormous difference between promoting Greece and explaining Greece. Explanation requires dialogue, listening and understanding why something important to Greece may also matter to somebody who is not Greek. Global Greeks have not a nature, but by their global experience and expertise, they have a natural advantage because they constantly operate between frames of reference. This is why Greece's relationship with its diaspora should become more intellectual, professional, and continuous, not more controlling, more substantive. Greece does not need global Greeks to agree with Greece on everything. It needs Greece to remain part of their intellectual, professional, and emotional horizon while they remain part of ours. Knowledge developed abroad then does not become lost knowledge for Greece. And Greece does not simply become the country somebody left 20 years ago and visits during the summer. This is also why the traditional discussion about brain drain is too narrow. The objective cannot simply be to bring everybody back. A globally connected country can benefit from Greeks inside and outside Greece, provided that the connection remains alive. And this brings me back to alliances. Perhaps Greece's opportunity is not to choose between being European, Atlantic, Mediterranean, or increasingly connected with the Middle East and India. Its advantage may be precisely that it can operate at the intersection of these spaces without pretending that it controls them. So it is essential that we can operate at intersections of geographical spaces without controlling them or without pretending we do. Connectivity is not dominance. Being useful is not being subordinate. Maintaining different relationships is not being without principles. And strategic flexibility does not mean strategic ambiguity about who you are. So when I ask whether Greece actually uses its global influence, I'm not asking whether Greece has enough people lobbying governments around the world. I'm asking whether Greece has fully understood the advantage of having people connected with it, operating across different societies, institutions, professions, and intellectual environments precisely when the international system is becoming more networked and at the same time more fragmented. And perhaps the vision for the next 20 years begins there, not with controlling a diaspora or dominating a region, but with a Greece globally connected enough to listen, confident enough to contribute, reliable enough to be trusted, and useful enough to be wanted at the table when the relationships and structures of the next 20 years are being shaped. And ultimately, global Greek influence should be measured by whether Greece and global Greeks participate meaningfully in the places where the future is being discussed, created, and eventually decided. Because I really don't want to have a long live too, I'm just going to conclude by saying that building on these two pre-launch live events last week and today, we welcome season 7 of Global Greek Influence, which starts on the 1st of September, which is next Tuesday, on Spotify and here on this YouTube channel. The Global Greek Influence podcast has always gone beyond the headlines, beyond the news cycles, and into the forces, people, and ideas that are already shaping what comes next in alliances, interests, and decisions. This was live 2 of the Global Greek Influence podcast pre launch. I will see you again at the launch on September 1st on Spotify and here on this YouTube channel. Thank you very much for following me. If you haven't done so, please follow me here on YouTube and on